everybody, this is your favorite Tank Wreck Noobs, and today I'm going to be starting a new series on this channel called Tank Talks, where, in all retrospect, as the name suggests, I talk about tanks, specific ones, and their history together. So, let's get right into it. We know in times that during war, valuable resources must be spent in getting men the proper equipment and transportation in order to fight in the said war. So, in 1943, the Germans decided it was time to make a new tank. A tank that had better armor and have a higher velocity 88mm that could crush the US Jumbo Shermans. Now, the Jumbo Shermans were an American assault heavy tank that was built in May 1944 through July 1944 by Fisher Tank Arsenal and was based upon a standard M4A3 hull, but with a little twist. The M4A3 had 76mm of armor on the front plate, 51mm on the turret, and 30mm on the upper sides. But the M4A3 Easy 2, also known as the Jumbo, had an additional 38mm of armor plating welded to its upper hull and sides, making the overall thickness 101mm on the front and 76mm on the sides. The rear and lower parts of the hull was left unchanged. The Jumbo was a very reliable tank at its time, with its 101mm of armor that it could stop an 88cm or 88mm KW-36L/56 shell, which was the gun that was used on the famous Tiger 1 tanks, from a good 400 plus meters away, and having basically the same steering, making it a literal breeze to drive it. Even though the Jumbo was a great tank, its full potential use was basically what commanders would probably say, use what we can now for the big finale later. Because the new tank at the time, which was going to be the M26 Pershing, was still in development and wasn't ready yet. Then in November of 1944, the M26 Pershing came out of the factory with its oh sweet and good 90mm gun and armor going up to 102mm on the front plate, 76mm on the lower hull and turret sides, and 50 to 75mm on the tank sides. The tank weighed a total of 46 tons and needed a 5-man crew to operate it. To move the 46-ton beast, it had a Ford GAF 8-cylinder gasoline engine that could push out 450 to 500 horsepower, making the tank able to reach 30 miles per hour or 48 kilometers per hour on roads and 5.25 miles per hour or 8.45 kilometers per hour off-road. It used the torsion bar suspension that was on the Sherman tanks, but for the battle-scarred environment in Europe on Shermans, this kind of suspension suffered many problems which led to breakdowns. But the M26 had a modified version of the suspension which gave it more durability in Europe. By having 2,202 of the M26 built, only a few were able to see combat in Europe, mostly in the Battle of Remagen, due to its prolonged development. Even though the M26 had better firepower, mobility, and armor, the US historian R.P. Hunnicutt, if I'm saying that right, ranked the M26 behind the Tiger II, but ahead of the Tiger 1 and Panther tanks. Even though its performance and service life was amazing, in 1951 it was withdrawn and taken out of production, giving way for the M48 and M60 Patton tanks that were to come later on. But enough about the M26. Let's move on to the famous Super Pershing, also known as the T26E1-1. To match the King Tiger's more powerful 88mm KWK-43, the US Army ordered a tank that had the same capabilities as the M26, but with a little bit more firepower. In January 1945, the T-15E1 90mm gun was developed and mounted on a T-26E1 hull, and it was given the designated name the T-26E1-1. But with great power comes great problems. The gun was so long and heavy that even an electrical vertical turret drive couldn't even hold it up, and it led to many problems when it came to time to fire or aim the gun. To combat this problem, two springs were added to the top of the tank's turret, which gave it the ability to hold up the gun and made it easier to handle the massive gun's recoil as well. In addition to this, a 100mm steel box was added as a counterweight on the back of the turret to keep the tank from listing forward. Even though this was added, the tank is still noticeably listing if you look up pictures of it. In hopes of keeping the tank up to date against the heavier German vehicles, the maintenance crew decided to have the tank up armored and went cutting away at a dead Panther's armor. The Panther's front turret was a good 80mm thick and was added to the Pershing's turret. The frontal and lower glacis had two large pieces of metal, each 38mm thick, welded on the tank and was sloped more than the hull armor was. After testing was done, the tank was sent to Europe and arrived on the 15th of March 1945 and was given to the 3rd Armored Division, where its gun lived up to the expectation of the crew by going through a Panther's front plate like a hot knife cutting through butter. John P. Irwin, the gunner of the first Super Pershing, writes 3 prominent actions of the Super Pershing, saying that it could destroy the enemy tanks with little difficulty, and the tank having killed 3 tanks and capturing 1 when a gunfight between the 2 tanks left the enemy out of ammunition. Though many people in the US Army was hoping for a fight against the Pershing and a King Tiger, it sadly never came to be a reality, as the tank never went face to face with a tiger and it never saw one during its service in the European War. But then the day everyone dreaded came. After the war, the powerful and mighty Super Pershing tank that lived up to everyone's expectation was sadly scrapped in post-war demobilization. The final image of the tank can be seen lying in the vehicle dump in Kassel, Germany. But here is the bright side of things, but also the dark side of things. Though the tank was scrapped, the ideas for the Super Pershing lingered in many people's heads long after the war was over. The next tank to be developed was to have the 90mm T-15E2 cannon mounted on the T-26 EZ-3 tank instead of the T-15E1 gun, which showed how the one-piece ammunition made loading a little bit prohibitive in the M26 turret. Another idea was to convert normal M26 Pershings to mounting the T-52 cannon, which had a shorter ammunition. The tanks were to be named the T-26E1, but the bad thing about it, production was halted after issues with the guns and a cut in the project funds were found, thus leading to the sad and tragic end of the T-26E1 Pershing and the rest of the versions to come with it. Even though the tanks are no longer in use anymore and have been scrapped, you can play some war games that feature these big pieces of history and have the ability to see what they were capable of if the right cards are played. You can check out games like War Thunder, World of Tanks, and maybe even Hell Let Loose if they have an update coming for it. But other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.